Welcome back to the show, where we were blathering about indie games. So, what were you saying, Levi?
Well, I was coming into the topic of indie games, of how it's exploded, and and I think Steam actually had a really big thing to do with the explosion of the indie game development. Steam always has, if you are not familiar with Steam, Steam is a game client for PC gamers, and it really collects some of the largest titles under one roof. And it allows you to use this client to manage your games instead of having to use individual clients such as Uplay or Origin from EA. You still have to have those if you play the Ubisoft or EA games. However, Steam can still manage that for you.
Right.
Steam can manage just about anything for you. But anyway, Steam has a program called Greenlight, and a lot of people may not be familiar with Greenlight. But what Greenlight does is it puts in spotlight what indie developers, are working on. So if there's a small studio, most gaming studios started out as a few people, and Greenlight really showcases what those indie developers come up with. It gives them a chance to make some money, and to get a fan base together so they can take their games to the next level. And currently at this point in time, we were talking about the current business model in the gaming industry. It really turns out that even though indie developers, the explosion has happened with indie developers, the problem is right now is they're still trying to suck up to the large companies like, EA and Ubisoft, because they're the companies that really have the money to back their development. A lot of these indie developers are lacking the resources that they need to develop very beautiful 3D games that you would expect to see on a next-gen level.
Yep.
But, Greenlight is a great program for indie developers to, really get their name out there.
But you can also have topics of games that would not work for the mainstream. Like one of the games on Steam Greenlight that I'm excited about is called World of Diving. And for 99% of the people out there, it'd probably be the most boring game in the world, because all you're doing is diving. You're like diving around in this infinite, procedurally generated ocean. And that's it. Like, that's all you do. You swim around, you see shit, you take pictures of things, you try not to get eaten by sharks. But for me, I love that kind of game. I like exploration, and I like the occasional game where I don't feel the pressure to kill everything or do a bunch of goals. Sometimes I just want to go home and just dick about on a game for a while.
And see, and honestly, that really ties into what the magic of indie developers do for us.
Exactly.
Because indie developers...
No mainstream company would back World of Diving.
Right.
Simple as that. Because there's not going to be enough money to be made to make it onto discs, to give it the marketing, to give it the plastic cases, to give it the instruction books, and to get the licenses for the consoles. It has to be PC.
Exactly. And the PC gives the developers, anyone can make a program, anyone can make a game for the PC. Whereas when it comes down to making a game for the Xbox, now we're talking the Xbox One and the PS4. To make a game for those, it requires licenses, and it requires the ability to create the discs, and those secrets are trade secrets that are only divulged by Sony and Microsoft to people who are registered game studios that will make sure that they won't sell their software off to random people in the middle of nowhere. No one wants to have off-kit software that someone robbed.
And there have been reports that, the PlayStation 4, the 3, is notoriously difficult to even develop for that reason. Like, Sony doesn't want you to develop a game for the PS3, but put it on other systems really easily.
And Sony...
So it's a pain in the ass.
And Sony took a big-ass hit for that, and that's one of the big things that they addressed in the PS4 was they said, okay, hey, we made it a little hard on game developers last time, which really it hurt their launch. Not only were they the more expensive system at the time, which in the industry of a downturn economy, people were shooting for, the cheaper system, but at the same time, making it harder for game developers reduced the amount of exclusive titles they launched with. Yep. So, one of the biggest selling times for a game system is when it launches. A launch time is very important because really how the launch goes affects the wrap of that game system for the life of it.
Yep. And again, going back to the whole creative aspect, when you make shit harder for developers, they're not going to come up with more brilliant ideas. They're going to come up with the path of least resistance, which is oftentimes reusing the same assets that they know have sold in the past, rather than taking a chance, doing something new, and actually trying to give us the next Mario or the next Zelda or the next fucking Grand Theft Auto or something, just something new and different.
Exactly, and honestly, the only company out there right now that's really willing to take a moonshot per se is Nintendo. I mean, Nintendo has shown a fall in sales, but their company has consistently showed that they're very committed to the gaming industry, and they're definitely for a different niche in the gaming industry. I mean, I don't see Nintendo making more money, honestly, ever anymore. Because, I mean, the gaming industry really has changed a lot. People are going for more realism. I mean, it's almost like a form of art. People went through abstracts in traditional art, way back in ancient times, and then, during the Renaissance period, people wanted realism and naturalism.
Right. It's always cyclical.
Right, and that's happening in the gaming industry. We've went from cartoony fantasy worlds to now people are, people are really coming out with just wanting this realism in games. They want realistic graphics. They want realistic physics. And that's it. The gaming industry is shifting toward that.
Yep.
And Nintendo is really losing its foothold. Even though it's an innovative company, even though its values as a company are excellent, it will eventually fail given its current course of action right now.
Nintendo is being the stubborn old man who can't change with the times.
Yeah,
But to their credit, they're also minimizing their risk by doing things like having the Wii U, which does not have the cost per unit that the PlayStation doesn't. Because they had mentioned they took some flack when the original Wii came out, because they were the only system that couldn't play DVDs, they couldn't play Blu-rays, they couldn't play anything. And they took some heat for it, and they said, look, if we had put an HDMI cable on it, and if we had allowed the Wii to play DVDs, those are all licensing fees, and those are all technical fees that they would have had to pass on to us. So by stripping their system down so it only played games, it allowed them to first of all, lower the price for us, and second of all, allow them as a company to concentrate more on the games themselves rather than the hardware.
Absolutely. But, I mean, in a modern gaming world, and just kind of jumping from an IT point of view.
Oh, there it is.
I mean, gaming has been kind of a slower... We're going to start seeing a lot more games come out, because gaming in the past, it's almost like learning your own language. Each engine, each platform, each console has its own specific set of codes. It's a computer, and those codes tell it what to do. Those codes tell it how to render graphics,
Right.
And the gaming industry in the past has been all its own world. Microsoft had its own architecture in its Xbox. PS3 had its own architecture in its PlayStation. And Nintendo still has its own architecture in the Nintendo system. They all use different hardware, meaning that game code on one system is not transferable to another.
Right.
We've entered an age of consoles now where consoles and computers are now one, because the consoles are finally now running on an x86 architecture, which is a 32-bit chip, which is basically, I mean, if you break it down, we go CPU to CPU. A 64-bit architecture is simply 2 cores running at 32 bits.
Yeah, that's why
so we've got 32-bit systems, and 64-bit is completely compatible with 32-bit, meaning that PCs and the new consoles are perfectly interchangeable. The only difference is there are codes within the interface of the, you could say, compact operating systems that both Microsoft's Xbox One or Xbone and the PS4 has. Yeah, kudos to Microsoft. I love your nickname that you never really wanted to accept, but I just made that happen. Xbone.
And it's why everyone knows that the age of consoles is going to be dead one of these years. I don't think... I've mentioned this before. I don't think we're at the last console generation yet, because to me, I don't think we're going to have the last console generation until consoles are truly interchangeable parts. Like, and yeah, I mean,
Well,
you
the
could
thing I think is
jailbreak
what's
a
going to
system,
happen
but-
is essentially the next level of consoles, assuming there is a next level of consoles. There's a lot of debate about this in the game. We could go all night about whether or not there's going to be another console. But let's just focus on the present here. And the present is, the fact of the matter is, now that the consoles are running on a 32-bit architecture, they technically can be jailbreaked, and you could probably install an operating system on them, like Microsoft Windows.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's probably possible somehow to take the PS4 and install Microsoft Windows on it. Because, I mean, think about it. The PS4 is running on a CPU, it's an AMD chip, and it is running on a GPU, which is also an AMD chip. So, I mean, AMD is compatible, and a 32-bit architecture is compatible with a 32-bit architecture operating system.
What I'm saying is, like, if I can make a prediction that the next generation is actually going to be like mini computers or specialized computers, like, like I bet you the next generation of consoles, they're going to be in the, like, they will have their own operating systems. They will be able to take any file, that kind of thing.
I mean,
I really think it'll happen.
That's a funny thing about the operating system now. It's kind of bullshit that they don't.
Right.
Because, I mean, like I've said a million times already, they're 32-bit architectures right now. There are computers. They are bona fide computers. They are nothing like the previous consoles, which were built on their own set of code and their own shit. I mean, I don't even want to go into what the Xbox 360 was, a mutant-ass code glob of hell, and the PS3 was even worse. So, you know, it makes me happy to see the PS4 and the Xbox One actually finally adopting similar hardware. It's also going to help game developers develop for both systems.
But I mean, like, the PS4, tell me if you know this, like, the PS4 doesn't have a media player. Like, you cannot put music on a PS4 and listen to music. And you can't put movies. You can't say. And
that's pretty bad, and I didn't know that.
And it's like the PS4.
So it doesn't it doesn't recognize any file, any movie file or music file.
Nah,
no MP3s, no nothing.
No.
Wow, that's really bad.
But I mean, I'm sure they will eventually put
that'll
it in.
be patched in.
Yeah. But
then again, it is a computer.
Right.
It can be patched.
But that's what I'm saying. Like.
That's a software issue.
I have a feeling that the next generation will not only be designed primarily for games, but they'll be designed that they can take in any file and all that, because people want as few electronic devices as possible.
But then again, when you go into that, when you take that next step, you know, I mean, who is going to have the edge on the market at that point? Microsoft. Microsoft is going to have the edge on that, because who has created a very successful operating system, not only in the consumer world, but in the business world as well? Microsoft.
Exactly.
They know how to build in operating systems that are not only compact, but are that you can distribute very quickly.
Absolutely.
So Microsoft is going to have the edge on the console era. I mean, you know, and I know there's a lot of Sony junkies out there that love the PS4, and, you know, hell yeah, I love the PlayStation, but the fact of the matter is Sony does not hold a stick to Microsoft's skill of their employees in creating operating systems and circumventing problems in software, because Microsoft is the best.
Plus, Microsoft has a monopoly on it. I mean, you know, you can say that they're split up
you can say Linux. You can say Linux, Ubuntu, which right now is the most popular distro. You know, which is actually the most successful distro of Linux right now. And you can say that Linux is actually, I mean, it's got the best foothold it's ever had in the history of Linux, but yet it's still falling way short of Microsoft Windows 7 or 8. And 8 is shitty. But, I mean, fact of the matter is, there's already more people running Windows 8 probably.
I mean, Microsoft wanted the Xbox One to be the dual system. I mean, they're a little short, obviously. But that's why marketing spent so long blathering about how it can enhance your TV viewing experience. I mean, they want the Xbox One to be in every person's household, to be able to do more than just do games. And
the Xbox One is an entertainment solution.
Right.
That is what Microsoft's vision for the device is.
And Sony's is not. And it will come to a point where Sony's going to have to step up the next the PlayStation 5 or whatever,
I mean,
to compete.
We're talking, you know, I mean, look at the past 10 years of gaming, the drastic differences that we have actually seen in the graphics. And, you know, look how many graphics cards, I mean, just take PC gaming for interest. Look how many graphics cards you can go through within a couple years trying to stay on ultra settings on the newest games.
Right, exactly.
I mean, you can't maintain 60 frames a second on the newest games without some ultra ass video card that comes out every other year. You know, so
yeah.
I mean, it's hard for PS4, in my opinion, to be able to keep up with the times because you know it's eventually going to fall on that shallow ground like the Xbox 360 and the PS3 did. You're going to eventually get games that are so intense for that processor and then that GPU that it's going to have long ass loading times. It's going to take a lot longer for the polygons to render in the environment. It's going to have a shorter field of vision. You know, and games are going to get more and more graphical. We're going to take another large step toward that realism, and you know, and the GPUs that are in the current consoles that we have now are no longer going to be efficient.
Right, and you know, Steam is making the Steam boxes, which basically is just
are basically micro ATX boards with an APU slapped in them, and then they run Steam OS.
That can also be customized by the individual makers.
Yes,
and that's why I think the next generation will be the last one, because Microsoft and Sony is going to have to compete with that. Because as soon as the Steam box comes out and everyone realizes how easy and awesome and
Steam
modularized
OS is really nice. It really is.
I mean, they will have to compete, and that's when we will see the last generation, because once Sony and Microsoft make the box that can be swapped out with parts, there's nothing stopping them from just selling the parts to you from then on.
Right.
And then that will be the last generation.
And you know what?
I think it's the next one.
And you know what's interesting is I think Steam OS right now is actually free to download.
Is it? I didn't realize it was even out.
I think that Steam OS, a beta or anything, I remember reading an article somewhere that it's actually free to download. You can get Steam OS, and you can load it on a PC.
I will have to look into that.
I mean, and wouldn't that be badass? I mean, I've never had my hands on Steam OS yet, but I am willing to take my Windows 8 laptop and dual boot that shit.
Absolutely.
I would like to see what Steam OS has to offer me. Because it's a small thing right now. Steam OS is not big. It has a long way to go to be where it needs to be. However, I mean, it's something that we need to look into, because Steam has brought a whole new era to managing your games, to keeping games in one place. And Steam has almost become a marketplace for a lot of the big gaming companies where they sell their games.
Not to mention the indies.
Yes, not to mention the indies.
As soon as you get the indies able to make console games as easily as they make PC games, I mean, it's going to change the game.
And I love how Steam always puts the indies on the front page.
Absolutely.
You know, they put the main games on the front page that they want to sell, the big titles, but they also put the indie developers on the front page. And I feel like that's the attention they deserve. Because those individual guys work just as hard as the people at the game studios making these indie games. And I'll tell you right now that they've put in no less work in doing what they do. And
and for them, it's like all or nothing for the risk. Like
exactly.
If you work for EA, they have enough money that if your game fucks up, you probably aren't going to get fired.
Exactly.
But for the indies, if you fuck up your game, that's your livelihood. You're gone.
Done.
You're done. You're filing for bankruptcy.
Your game has to be good. And especially if you divest all that time in it, you have a small studio, you're an entrepreneur. You're jumping into a hot industry when you are an indie developer. And people who do that, I've got a lot of respect for indie developers, because they bring new ideas to the table that otherwise would be overlooked.
Absolutely. That's why, Microsoft is doing the smart thing by trying to open up their tools and make it a little easier for indie developers to do things. Like with the 360, they were encouraging indie developers to really get into it with the Xbox Arcade and all that bullshit. And it's a good idea, and Sony's going to have to follow suit soon. Otherwise,
definitely.
I mean, that's where it's at. The indies are where it's at, because you can go to the mainstream for the big AAA bullshit, and you can go to the indies for the true innovation and the niche titles and the things that
the stuff you don't see mainstream right now is what the indie developers has to offer, and the indie developers, by doing that, advance the gaming industry in a different direction, because it's just like a lot of people. The masses, if you get a new food, say there's a new food on the table, a cultural food that you've never tried, you're going to be less inclined to try something that doesn't look good. However, you take that first bite, and it might be delicious. You know, and,
Absolutely.
and we're talking about that in the gaming industry as well. Yes, everyone is into the sandbox gaming industry, and that was awesome.
Link cannot catch a break. He just keeps face planting into stones.
And that looks really good in HD. That tower
Yes,
rising,
it does.
that looks good. But yeah, I mean, it's basically like trying a new food. You've got to feed this stuff to the masses, and if they bite down on it, they might think it's delicious.
That's right.
I mean, it's a solid analogy, and that's really where the gaming industry needs to go. People need to step out of their comfort zone in the games that they've been playing, and do something different. Yeah, I was reading an article earlier today about that actually a large percentage of people right now still prefer the fantasy genre, the dragons, the dwarves, the elves.
Oh, yeah.
It's still a very, very huge prominent thing in the gaming industry. Personally, I agree. I like the fantasy genre. It's my favorite. The realism hasn't quite hit me yet. There actually is a game that I was reading about. It's called, I think it's called Kingdom Come, and it's a real-life RPG of the Middle Ages that really depicts medieval combat in a realistic way.
Well, that's intriguing.
Yes, it's a really interesting game, and I would definitely encourage the viewers to check it out. Right now, they're working on a Kickstarter program, and they're trying to raise a large sum of money relatively to develop their game. And like we talked about earlier, it costs a lot of money to develop these games. But I recently watched a really good Kickstarter video. I mean, this guy he has a vision, and I really like the content that I see in the game so far. It's interesting. I've always been attracted to the medieval model, just, I'm not really sure how to put it. It's just, that was a time of just excitement. At the same time, it was a time of just strife. And it's a really good time period to make a game, because a lot of the games, they're almost glorifying violence, and people like that. And the gaming industry would love the Middle Ages depicted in a game. And I feel like that's one of those new foods that people should try, because, they're having a really hard time right now. I'll tell you that much from what I've read about the game and stuff. It's possible that this year, if they maintain enough funds, that they're shooting for a 2014 release.
Okay.
And it's a big game, and it's beautiful. It's built on the Cry engine. It's a gorgeous game. And I definitely would like to see something like that. It's a different knit. It's just a completely different spin on what we would expect from gaming right now.
Absolutely.
And those, like I said, those new things are really what brings the fruit to the gaming industry.
We'll talk more about this and other topics in the next episode. This has been a damn good session.
It has been. We've had some good conversations.
Tune in tomorrow as we continue to talk about games, explore the Tower of the Gods, and just otherwise do awesome things. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow.